Welcome. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fantastic.
So, can you tell people why you're here?
I'm Dave Gonzales. I'm one of 3 co-authors of MCU, The Reign of Marvel Studios. It's a book about the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe from about the early 90s to earlier this year in 2023.
Okay, so how did you get involved with this project?
My co-author Joanna Robinson was approached by the publisher the week that Endgame was released to expand her work that she had done for Vanity Fair about Marvel to what was initially supposed to be an oral history. And she's like, well, I need my friend Dave on because he knows so much about the Marvel Universe. And so we came on, and then the pandemic hit, and we were fortunate to get a whole bunch of interviews. But then towards the end of 2020, Disney started exercising its NDAs and telling people not to talk to us because I think they were afraid we were going to tell, too much of the story. So the book transitioned from an oral history to just a straight book, quotes, and then filling it all out, and it became a Hollywood history of the story of how, Marvel went from a little comic book company that was really interested in selling toys to putting out billion-dollar movies like every couple of years.
All right, so this has to be like a big project.
Yes.
How did you go about the research?
So primarily Joanna is excellent at doing interviews. So she would do the interviews, and then we would go about doing transcriptions. And then based off those transcriptions, it would go to me, and my job was primarily as a researcher. So luckily, a lot of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has existed while the internet existed. So I could do a lot of Wayback Machine Internet Archive stuff and find old posts or forum posts to fill in the gaps for the interviews that we didn't have. So we had we got to talk to Chris Hemsworth, we got to talk to Mark Ruffalo, we got to talk to Scarlett Johansson, but people like Chris Evans were sort of at that point done playing Captain America. Yeah. So luckily he had a whole bunch of interviews going back that we could sort of fill in the gaps, and the interviews were where the most of the material came from. And researching was sort of figuring out the interesting parts of the story that had to be filled in using research. So the weirdest thing is in the introduction for the book, we pick up at the Avengers Italian premiere, and I was able to figure out what Scarlett Johansson was wearing, what restaurant they went to, what everybody ordered, just by sort of backtracking and making some phone calls.
And because in the beginning of the book, you start with the story of how the whole Avengers cast was at this restaurant.
Yes.
And they were freely talking about the plans of the MCU, or at least Kevin Feige was.
Oh, yeah. And that was the first time I think that they realized how big this was going to be.
Yeah.
Because the Avengers was sort of like a proof of concept. Starting in 2008 when they made Iron Man, they thought maybe someday the Avengers. And then by the time they get to 2012, the Avengers comes out super successful. And from 2012 to 2019 is what I would describe as the reign of Marvel Studios, because every movie was a hit and everybody was enjoying the ride.
Yeah. So how has Marvel impacted pop culture, according to you?
Oh, a lot. They sort of seized a moment in time where intellectual property movies were big, so everything is sort of based off of a book or a comic or a toy that you had in the 80s. And they were able to do that and combine it with some changing in the movie market. So China started opening up in 2012 to accept more American films. And everybody worldwide started getting into the idea of these gigantic blockbuster superheroes. And superheroes have always been popular stories culturally worldwide. And Marvel was able to sort of capitalize on that. And I'm amazed as a comic book fan from the early 90s that everybody knows, who Thanos is and what the Infinity Stones do, because that was some of the most niche, geeky stuff.
Yeah.
And now everybody knows.
Yeah, but there are also many filmmakers who have criticized Marvel. For example, Martin Scorsese and I think Francis Ford Coppola as well.
Yeah.
What's your opinion on that?
The Marvel movies are much more like toys or comics, where it's a whole bunch of creatives shepherding a group vision. And that's completely different from what somebody that Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola or even Christopher Nolan would describe as film.
Yeah.
And I think there's room for both.
Yeah.
I wish there was more room for the Scorseses, the Nolans, and whatnot. And hopefully now that Marvel's slowing down its output, it won't be constantly Marvel movies taking up all the theaters. And we'll get things like, Oppenheimer and Barbie, which were very successful as like independent films. Oppenheimer as a very serious movie for adults, and Barbie, which is an IP movie, but an IP movie for everybody.
Yeah, but also, people say that Marvel is kind of in a slump right now.
Yeah.
Do you think that they can come out of it and become as big as they used to be?
I don't think anyone's going to be able to be as big as they used to be.
Yeah.
They hit at a very specific cultural moment. And I also, agree that Marvel's in the slump, but because of some labor strikes in America with SAG-AFTRA, with the WGA, everybody was having a tough year in Hollywood. So I think we really pick on Marvel because they used to be the king, and you take a shot at the king when everything goes down. I would say that Marvel's definitely done if they release a movie that has Avengers in the title and it bombs.
Yeah.
Because they're doing a lot of experimentation about different teams and how many Disney Plus shows you have to watch before you understand the movie. And I think that sort of experimentation is good, but Avengers is the brand that can't fail. At least there's never been an Avengers movie that has bombed. So if in 2026 we get Avengers Kang Dynasty or something like that and nobody goes to see it, then they really have a problem.
I actually read this morning that they want to step away from Kang as the villain.
That's true. You're up to date on your news.
Of course. How do you think Marvel can go about this the best way?
Because it's luckily they're teaching people about the multiverse. So the way they taught people about Thanos and the Infinity Stones over 3 phases, they're now teaching us to accept that there are multiple versions of different characters. So if they want, they could just have the old version of Kang, like, what's down there? And a new version kicks him off the edge, and suddenly we have a new actor. Or they could, I don't think they've overcommitted to Kang necessarily. He's mostly in Ant-Man, he's in Loki. But there's a bunch of different villains that could elevate. Like in 2 years we're going to get Fantastic Four. I would love to see Doctor Doom become a big bad. So I think they still have room to pivot. And the fact that they've moved a lot of their releases out a year, so we only get Deadpool 3 next year in terms of films, means they have a year to work on it and just sort of fix everything. And we know the Marvel process involves reshoots, rewrites, re-edits, so they can fully pivot to anything. The sky's the limit, I think, for them at this point.
And do you think they made a mistake introducing the multiverse? Because that's so big and people are just, there's so much content that people have to watch in order to just watch a movie to fully understand it. Do you think that?
I mean, to a certain extent, I could see why for the casual fan it seems sort of overwhelming. But I think if you focus on making individual good movies, like Sony and Into the Spider-Verse introduces Miles Morales and the concept of the Spider-Verse in like one movie, and they just made that movie so well and made it so artistically beautiful that people bought into it. I think part of Marvel's problem with the multiverse is not every movie is dealing with it in a certain way, or you'll get a post-credit scene where it's like, and now she's in another dimension. And you're like, oh, that wasn't what the story was about. So I think they need to focus a little bit on what they did so well in phases 1 through 3, which is we have a hero that we recognize, and that hero gets put into like a subgenre of comic book movies. So like Captain America Winter Soldier is like espionage, and like Guardians of the Galaxy is like almost an Indiana Jones space realm. And I think they need to refocus on just making really excellent movies.
The past few years, Marvel has also experimented with the diversity. Because in the book, it also mentioned that in the beginning, Hollywood, the big bosses, they just wanted the Chris's to be the main character, but Kevin Feige wanted to have diversity from the beginning as well. Do you think that they've done diversity well?
I definitely think so. They're definitely finding diverse stars. Like the Marvels, whether or not you like it, Iman Vellani is a star, and she's young, and she is that character, and she has this Gen Z optimism where even things are like really bad, she's going to come in and do it. And so I feel like that they really broke it open with like Captain Marvel and Black Panther, because when they finally were able to make those movies, they came out and both of them made over $1 billion. And something like Black Panther wasn't pandering. It was so Afrofuturist and so black. and unapologetically so, that it taught the world to enjoy that type of diversity. Yeah. So I think it's about being authentic and not necessarily just putting a diverse character in front because it's a diverse character. Yeah. Or in the same way the Marvels, that we bring Miss Marvel's family along, and we get sort of like the Pakistani American experience along with our space adventure. I think that if they drill down on authenticity, these stories are for everybody, and they could sort of introduce people to new perspectives.
Yeah, but there is also a group of fans who are very vocal against the whole diversity thing. How do you think they should deal with that, or just ignore them? Or
I think Marvel has always ignored them. I mean, comic book fans who are against changes to what they think their character is, or what they think their ownership to the character is. So you run it, when you enter into comic books or a comic book story, sometimes you really latch onto that thing that made you interested. For me, in the 90s, it was the Spider-Man clone saga, which a lot of people consider to be bad. But for me, that was how I got into Spider-Man. So I think it's really important with Marvel, now that they proved with their first run of movies that they can tell a coherent story where each movie's a sequel to another one. Now we're in an era where every Marvel movie has the potential to be somebody's first Marvel movie. And so I think they're going to have a lot more success if they're able to introduce these things as normal. And also just like, because of the nature of comics and because they're, owned by Disney, these are all very passionate fandoms that will yell at you. So I think they've always tried to follow their own hearts as producers of content rather than listen to the fans and be reactive. They're not something like Lucasfilm. Star Wars is very reactive to what the fans want. So like when The Last Jedi came out and a whole bunch of people were yelling about it, they changed what they were planning for the third movie, and then we get Rise of Skywalker, and then nobody's happy. So I kind of like the fact that Marvel doesn't listen. You could yell at them all you want, but they're politely going to not listen to you.
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned that you're a fan of Marvel yourself.
Yes.
Obviously, if you are going to embark on such a
Otherwise,
huge project.
I'd go crazy.
Exactly. Is there any character or storyline that you would like to see in the MCU?
Oh, now that we've, because I've seen everything, I'm really interested to see how they fold in Deadpool as a character who could break the fourth wall like She-Hulk, but is also rated R. And so as an adult and as somebody who, watched all the X-Men films too, I'm really looking forward to Deadpool 3 and seeing how Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman are able to play with that. But also I would eventually like a couple movies down the line for She-Hulk and Deadpool to meet and then both look out at the audience and both of them realize they're in a movie. I think that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, because also with She-Hulk, I read that there was a lot of production issue. There were a lot of production issues.
So there was some production issues because she's a walking special effect, and they're so used to being a studio that is trying to always let the best idea win, which occasionally means very short windows to render the VFX that would make She-Hulk. But also one of the benefits of that is usually Marvel has, the way they used to make TV and the way we cover in the book is they had like a head writer who would have a room and then write all the episodes. And then that head writer would sort of pass off to a director. And the director would then have a chance to like change the story or sort of direct the way they wanted to. With She-Hulk, they had Jessica Gao, who was a writer on Rick and Morty, run that room. And then rather than hand off to a director, she got to stay with them. So they had like continuity that was much more like how TV's traditionally made with the showrunner. And now, since the WGA successfully got a new deal after they struck, all TV shows need to have a showrunner and they need to have writers on set. So every Marvel story going forward that's presented as TV is going to need to have that consistency, and it'll hopefully mean that there's a consistent tone, unlike something like Secret Invasion or Falcon and the Winter Soldier, where you could really feel that like they started with an idea and they end somewhere completely different.
Okay, final question. What would you like people to take away from your book? Oh,
I'm really interested in it is like a portrait of a specific time in Hollywood. So I like to say that, like, if you're a Marvel fan, this is going to show some things that you maybe didn't know about before. If you're not a Marvel fan, you don't need to have seen all the movies to enjoy the book. We're much more of a sequel to books like Disney Wars or Sean Howe's Inside Marvel Comics. We're a portrait of a certain time in the industry that's never going to happen again.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
It was nice talking to you.
Yes, very interesting questions.